Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. We're 9 days away until BYU football kicks off against Portland State. Single digits. It's just around the corner, folks. We're finally here. Got a loaded show for you today here on Cougar Tracks as we're talking the post-fall camp depth chart. What's it going to look like for BYU football? Let's dive into it right now in the top story here on Cougar Tracks.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
So Kalani Sitake was asked on the final day of fall camp if he would release a depth chart. And you might think, why is that even a question? Why would that be up for debate? Well, Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham said that he might not release a depth chart anymore on the heels of the Big 12 Conference requiring player availability reports. We saw our first one yesterday, Iowa State, Kansas State, and it was pretty cool seeing out, doubtful, questionable, very cool. And I think honestly makes things a lot easier for everyone involved, but it raises the question, will Kalani take a page from his mentor back in the day, Kyle Whittingham, and not release the depth chart? This was Kalani.
I'm just going to do what everybody tells us to do, and we usually – Kenny, we're doing depth chart?
We'll see.
Yeah, so we'll probably have a depth chart. We'll see. I don't know. I think you kind of can figure it out. You guys see what's going on here when we let you guys watch our film. I watch our practices. You kind of have a feel for who's going to be on the field. But, yeah, I don't mind putting a depth chart out. And I can't speak for Kyle, but, you know, we just – go ahead. Is he talking about the injuries that we have to announce?
Yeah, his response to that.
I actually think that makes it easier for me. Now I don't have to I can just kind of tell you guys where it's going to be. Yeah. So that, it makes it easy for all of us. And so that part will be good.
I agree, Kalani. It makes life easier, but to his point, we do see practice. Not all of practices, obviously. We got about 6 media observation windows in fall camp. And we're able to glean some insightful stuff, I thought, in the 20 or so minutes in each of those practice observations. So I wanted to roll out my post-fall camp depth chart projection. And we'll start with the offense. At quarterback, obviously, it's going to be starter Bear Bachmeier. Behind him, I'm projecting McKay Hillstead will be the backup. I know Aaron Roderick left that as kind of a gray area, but, last week when it was the top 2 guys contending for the job, it was Bear Bachmeier and McKay Hillstead. It wasn't Trayson Bourget. So that's my depth chart at QB. No surprise there. No surprise at running back either. Aaron Roderick announced on Tuesday who his top 2 running backs are officially. LJ Martin, Sione Moa. No surprise. LJ Martin is expected to have a huge year for BYU, and Sione Moa is due, I think, for a big season as well. He looks healthy. He's been looking really good in camp and expecting big things from him. I go back to spring ball too. He was, to me, an offensive MVP from spring ball, him and Keelan Marion. And Marion, of course, is now off to Miami. But Sione Moa was excellent, so expecting big things from him. At wide receiver, the starters, Chase Roberts, JoJo Phillips, Parker Kingston. That's the top 3. And all the coaches have been pretty consistent with that messaging of those 3 being atop the depth chart at wide receiver. Next in line, there's some conversation you can have and debate of what direction that goes. To me, it goes Cody Hagan, Tay Nakua, Tiger Bachmeier. Reggie Frischneck maybe next in line in that group, but Hagan, Nakua, Bachmeier, I like that 6. Outside of Chase Roberts, though, no one has consistently performed at a high level week after week. And I think that's the question with that wide receiver unit is who alongside Chase becomes a consistent contributor. I like JoJo Phillips. I like Cody Hagan. I think Parker Kingston has really taken a step forward in his progression. Tiger Bachmeier, what role does he have? Everyone's going to have eyes on Bear to Tiger connection. And then Tay Nakua. He's a Nakua, man. Is he ready to step up and become a contributor this season? Expecting big things as a redshirt freshman to put him into the 2 deep. At tight end, Carson Ryan is the starter. No surprise there. That's not even up for debate. That's pretty, that's as obvious as it gets. And then the backup to me is Kean Need, transfer from Weber State and New Mexico. He, from really practice number one, has been with the first team offense and looks like that second tight end that if BYU does go to some 12 personnel, I would imagine it would probably be Carson Ryan and Kean Need. And what I like about those two guys is they've got completely different skill sets, but they also have similarities where they're both physical. They can be an extra blocker on the line of scrimmage. I like the talents of both of those guys and how they can play off of each other. And BYU can do a lot of different things and keep opposing defenses guessing with both of those guys on the field if they go to that 12 personnel. Offensive line, Kalani Sitake told me yesterday here on Cougar Tracks that they're still trying to figure out that starting five. I think it's pretty, I don't want to say cut and dry. I think it's more just along the lines of who are they going to start against Portland State, because some guys are banged up. And one of those guys, Waylon Lapuaho, like we just didn't see him much in camp. We saw him, I believe, in 2 media observation windows. But for the most part, he was off to the side. And Aaron Roderick said that they expect him to be playing against Portland State, but you just never know. And we'll find out, coming up in 9 days officially. Keep in mind, too, with the availability reports in the Big 12, those are only for conference games, not BYU, Portland State, Stanford, East Carolina. We won't get availability reports until week 5 when BYU travels to Boulder to take on the Buffs. So keep that in mind. So it'll be kind of the old way of injuries up until game time leading up that week. But Waylon will be one to watch just because he's been a little bit, they've been careful with him during fall camp. But I think the offensive line from left to right, Isaiah Jada, starting left tackle, he's been anointed that since really December. Last, signing day at December, Aaron Roderick said Isaiah Jada is going to be a starting left tackle for us. He's made that clear for 8.5 months, and Jada has done a really good job thus far. Left guard, when healthy, Waylon Lapuaho. Center, Bruce Mitchell, had some issues with his snaps early in camp. Feels like he's kind of fixed that and adjusted and getting back to the Bruce that I think we expect him to be, which is, I think, potentially a leader on this offense. I think Bruce Mitchell has a ton of potential. Right guard, I'm going to go with Austin Leausa, and then right tackle, Andrew Gentry. Michigan transfer. He got healthy in the springtime after spring ball concluded, and he's looked great at the right tackle position. 6'8", just what you want physically from an offensive tackle. He looks the part and then some. Right guard, it's either between Leausa, Sonny Mocassini. You could go either or there. Because Kyle Safarachuk could be in that mix too, the Southern Utah transfer. On the second unit, along the offensive line, I've got left tackle, a true freshman, Andrew Williams. And Andrew Williams, I think, is going to be the next Blake Freeland. He is going to be a special football player. And keep in mind, Jada, he's a redshirt senior, so this is the last ride for him. So the future of a guy like Andrew Williams is going to be here quicker than we realize. I mean, I know it's ideally not until January, but his day will come in short order. Andrew Williams is going to be a good one for BYU. Back up at left guard, you could go Mocassini because he could play any of those spots. I went Kyle Safarachuk or Trevin Osler. I thought Trevin Osler's done a really nice job in camp. So those are some of the names I would look at that backup spot for Waylon Lapuaho. And then center, I went Kyle Safarachuk. You could also go Trevor Pay as well, younger brother to Connor Pay. Right guard, Sonny Mocassini. And then right tackle, I went Caden Chittister. Chittister has, I think, his size. I like his talent. And, Ethan Thomason early on in camp was dealing with a little bit of an ankle that he was dealing with in the offseason. Ethan Thomason, like Andrew Williams, going to be spectacular. I think in 2026, those are probably your starting tackles. Well, Gentry's got more eligibility remaining, but Ethan Thomason's going to be really good. He was just next in line. Chittister, though, I put at that right tackle spot. So that's my depth chart for the offensive side. We'll get to the defensive side a little bit later here in the program. Let's take a break. On the other side, we'll get to more Cougar Tracks here on KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio. Cougar Tracks rolls on here on KSL Sports YouTube. Again, every day. It's a daily show now here on Cougar Tracks, and I am loving the daily format, and I appreciate all of Cougar Nation showing up and supporting this show. Continue to support the show. Leave a 5-star rating on the podcast feed. Subscribe. We are coming to you daily throughout the season, so it's going to be a lot of fun here on Cougar Tracks throughout the year. And as you see at the top here on the video feed, I asked the question, how did your BYU football fandom begin? I posed this question on social media last night, and I've been so impressed by the stories. And I asked this question because when a new football season shows up, there's just so much excitement, and there's just been so much waiting. And one of my favorite things about interacting with Cougar Nation is getting to know how they became fans, because BYU fandom is so unique in the college landscape. You know, it could be tied to your faith as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Not everyone's LDS members. Let's keep that in mind. You know, there's many people from different walks of life that follow BYU sports, but some people are truly connected to the team through their religion. Others, maybe through their family. Dad, mom, alums, they were a student at BYU. There's so many different ways to connect to BYU sports, in particular BYU football. And, so I just asked the question. I wanted to hear the stories of Cougar Nation. And again, I've been impressed by the reaction. It even populated on Cougar Board, and we'll get to that here in a little bit too. But, BYU football, and when I talk about fandom, BYU basketball obviously factors into this as well. And maybe we'll get to this topic when we get closer to the BYU basketball season. But I wanted to kind of focus on BYU football in particular. And I remember growing up as a kid, my first connection to BYU football was when I was 7 years old. Vivid memories. Now, I had previous experiences with BYU football. My dad, diehard BYU fan. So I remember watching the 1994 Copper Bowl. I say remember, vaguely remember. I don't have many vivid memories. I've watched the game, of course, but I don't remember what was going on that day. I think there were some other games that I attended when I was younger. But when I was 7 years old, I went to the 1995 BYU UCLA game in Provo, and you're thinking probably, why would you bring that up? But that game to me was so interesting because it was my first glimpse of seeing a guy in person that I was reading a lot about in the summertime, that being Steve Sarkisian. I remember reading HBRNet's Cougar Sports Line. I remember reading newspaper articles about this, number one JUCO hotshot quarterback that picked BYU over Kansas State. Remember John Walsh was mulling over, is he going to go to the NFL? Is he not? It kind of hangs in the balance of this JUCO guy. I was really intrigued with this JUCO dude. So I'm like, Walsh, if you got to go, you got to go. I'm intrigued by this Sarkisian guy. And so just reading about him, I always had a passion for reading as a young kid, very young age. When people ask me how I got into this job, I tell them I have a passion for reading. It was a foundation for me. And so to young people, I highly recommend reading. It's a huge deal. But reading about Steve Sarkisian was just kind of interesting to me, and his recruitment. And that's really what kind of triggered a lot of the things that I like today when I talk about on this show. So I go to the BYU UCLA game with my dad, and BYU obviously lost that game. And think about this. The first year where I'm really connecting with BYU football, 1995, was the first year in a long streak of seasons where BYU was consistently going to bowl games. That season is where it all came to an end. But I pulled up some old footage of BYU UCLA, and I had to roll this here for you. Just listen to the sound bites. This is just raw audio from the broadcast. The KSL archive is awesome, man. I could dive into that thing for days. But this was some BYU UCLA clips. See, that's what I was experiencing. In the crowd, you're probably hearing me. I was in the south end zone. in this game. Gosh, I want to say it wasn't Portal SS. It was a little bit almost dead center behind the goalpost, if memory serves me right. But UCLA just hammered BYU. But late in this game, I thought it was cool when Sark connected and had a drive, a touchdown drive. I thought, okay, Sark's going to be okay right there. And then the next play, touchdown coming up here. Listen to this. Oh, yeah. Atula Mealy. Me as a young 7-year-old just getting hyped going, I still believe Sark's going to be the man. Look at these crowd shots. I swear my kid went to back to school dressed like that guy. That was 30 years ago. Chris Pella. Look at the attire, man. It was a vibe back in the day. But I wanted to share that too. And my fandom back in the day, like right now I'm a BYU, I'm a media member. I cover the Cougs. I take it very professional, but I had points in my life where I connected on a deep level with BYU, and it just stuff that just really stands out to me. And that's why I posed the question, because when you get to this time of the year, it's just so much excitement, so much fun. And I remember one year too, 1999, there was a year unlike any other where BYU rolled out new uniforms and a new complete look, and this just blew me away.
There it is, the new look for the Cougars in the 21st century. It's still royal blue, but much darker, and it's trimmed in tan.
Someone asked me about the tradition, and I said, unfortunately, in the past, our tradition has been nobody wears colors to the games. So we're trying to start a tradition where people do wear school colors to the games.
9 versions of the new logo were unveiled today, anywhere from the block lettering to the mountains to a flying cougar. But the most drastic of all came in the football uniforms, including the helmet. Gone is the white, and in is the Denver Bronco blue. This is a major change.
I like the helmet. That's my favorite part. You know, the dark helmet. I like the tan stripe. So, I mean, I think it's a good look for us.
I like the lines of the way they, we kept the Y on the insignia on the helmet, but it'll be different to have a dark helmet because we have been a white for a long time, as you say.
Sideline there by Nike.
Yes, even Lavelle was there to model his new look for the upcoming season. Before your next modeling gig, work on the walk a little bit.
I'll do that. I've always been kind of hump-shouldered, and I just got to get that up and get my chin up. When I've had pictures taken and when I've modeled, I've had to be told to get my chin up.
How's that for a throwback? But I remember when those got released, and I thought to myself, oh, these are so cool. They're so awesome. Looking back on that was so terrible. That's so bad. That tan look was awful. But how cool was that runway show? Now it would just be a little private green screen thing where players stand in front and go, ah! That would be the runway these days in 2025 with a jersey reveal. The simpler times, man. But I wanted to ask Cougar Nation, how'd your fandom begin? Because I think we all have a story. I think everyone's got a story of how they connected with BYU sports and BYU football in particular. So I turned to X, and the responses have been awesome. I've loved every second of it. I'll try to get as many as I can, and I'll dive into some of the Cougar board stories as well. We got Shane00 on X. He writes, born into it. Both parents went to BYU. Dad is a huge fan. Back in the 90s when games weren't on national TV, my dad had a like 20-foot across satellite put in our backyard solely to watch BYU games. Listen to basketball games from California on the radio too. That's a great core memory for people. I remember being I went to Disneyland for the first time as a kid in 2000. And one of the things that I thought was so cool, just because I heard the stories of, oh, you can get KSL in California at night or in Idaho for years, the blowtorch of KSL. And I remember in our rental car going to the hotel. Well, not in the rental car. I think it was, where was it? It was somewhere in California, but I turned into a radio at night and heard 1160 a.m. Pretty cool. Aaron Hinton says, started off with deep hatred after watching Ty Detmer destroy the Wyoming Cowboys in the early 90s, and continued when Sarkisian and the 96 team won the WAC championship game against a very good Cowboys team. Fast forward to 2023, my first game at LES, now I'm a fan. Wow. You hated BYU and you're a Wyoming fan? Now you're a Coug? Welcome aboard. Mark LeBaron, good dude here. Met him a few years ago at a Cougar kickoff. Good man. Let's see. Growing up in the 90s, my dad would listen to Paul James on the radio call BYU games. He was a big fan, and I loved him telling me about the Miracle Bowl and other games played before I was born. He was self-employed, and we didn't have a ton of money, but sometimes people would give him tickets to games, so we would go once in a while. Being in LES as a kid was memorable. It was a great way to spend time with my dad. He passed away over a decade ago, but I still think of him every time I go to games or watch them. My father-in-law is a season ticket holder, which allows me to continue the BYU fandom with my son and his grandpa, which we love. So in short, I'm a fan because of family. That's cool, Mark. I love that. You know, I think that is, to me, it is really cool when you go into LaVell Edwards Stadium. It is pretty special. It's a really family-oriented place. I do think family connects BYU fans. I did a podcast, a long-form narrative podcast called a Century of Cougar Football, talking about my connections to my family through BYU football. And I think why I'm always interested in the BYU fandom stories is because if you're like me, a lot of your identity becomes attached to BYU, or your relationships are formed because of BYU. I work in this job because of my passion for BYU sports. And that means the world to me. And a lot of the people I know and interact with and are friends with me and people that I'm close to is through a common thread of BYU football. So, and BYU sports in general. I mean, I got great BYU basketball stories too, but focusing here on the football side of things right now. Let's see. A wise run on X writes, my dad took me to BYU football games as a kid in the days of Fly the Friendly Skies of Jim McMahon. No in-zone stadium. We would listen to Paul James to and fro. He would have a headset in for the radio play-by-play and a little portable TV so he could see replays. He was like the little nerdy BYU Inspector Gadget. That is also when I fell in love with Cosmo, love at first sight. The portable TV era, man. 1997 Washington. I remember my dad had the yellow Sony headset, and I always associate this with Kevin Federick's dad. Kevin Federick's dad had this. He'd be outside the locker room. My dad had the same headset. It was the yellow Sony headset, wireless, had the green button, AM, FM radio on the headset. And then he had that. I had like a portable TV that was, I think it was a Sony, or maybe it's a Philips. I can't remember. But it was a little tiny one. Pull up the antenna, and we're watching, 2, 4, 5, and 13. Back then, it was more Channel 4 with college football. There was no Fox broadcast in the 90s back then. But, yeah, the portable TV, that was great. David Vaughn says, went to watch the 83 Holiday Bowl with some older kids at their house in Spokane where I grew up. Okay. They were cheering for BYU. Started as a Wazoo fan and found myself rooting for BYU. David, smart move. You'd be left in the wilderness right now. You'd be with Wazoo in the Pac-12 and Pac-2 this year. You'd have, granted, BYU wandered the wilderness too. But now it's better times for the Cougs in blue compared to the ones in crimson. Ryan Christensen, I am a diehard Ute. Hey, what? How did this get here? And don't really like BYU anymore. But when I was a kid, I was a BYU fan, raised in a BYU family. Peak fandom was when I attended the Miracle Bowl and not only stayed till the end, we moved down to the first row. It was great. I have no regrets. Thanks for the story, Ryan. And I'm curious, does this happen often in your circle of people? I knew some people growing up where they were BYU fans and now they're Ute fans, which is fine. Like, do it. But at the same time, like, how do you do that? How? Like, if you're going to change teams, go from BYU to Texas, BYU, or, where you went to your undergrad or where you grad school, whatever. I get that. Maybe there's a case of, you grew up BYU fan, maybe undergrad is at Utah and you got a little bit of liking. Maybe, I guess. But crossing rivalry lines, that's crazy. But Ryan, I appreciate that. I guess I don't see very often. Maybe Keanu Tenavasa is an exception, where many convert from Utah to BYU. I see more BYU to Utah, but I haven't seen many examples of former Ute fan changing to the blue. Players, it happens, Keanu, but interesting. Cougar Board had an awesome thread too, and I checked that out. And I'm not going to be one of those media members that says, I don't look at Cougar Board. I check in. I want to know what Cougar fans are talking about. Like, that's just what it is. J-Rod in DC on Cougar Board wrote, saw Mitch Harper ask the question, thought it was worth asking here. Would love to hear others. My mom started teaching at BYU in the 70s before she was a member of the church. She joined because of the missionary work of her students. She had football players in her dance classes throughout the 80s, and they'd always sign stuff for me whenever my mom asked. First game I went to was the Texas game in 1988. That's cool. Been a BYU fan as long as I can remember. Oh, everything I have to that place. Very cool. 88 Texas. I think, what was that? Eric Metcalf. That was a game BYU won, I think, 48-7. It was another blowout game. BYU until 2023, until Sark, who I mentioned earlier, BYU was just crushing Texas in every game they played pretty much. Let's see. Some other Twitter X post. BYU Statsman, who put out a really good stats almanac on that's available for purchase for people. I highly recommend you go check that out. It's really good. He put out a story as well. Didn't watch a lot of college football growing up, but was a casual Nebraska fan. Came home from a friend's house when I was 14, and my dad and his friend were watching the 2005 Las Vegas Bowl. I watched the end of it, but didn't really become a BYU fan. The following summer, we were in Utah and went to the University Mall. I had decided I wanted to get into college football, and I was going to choose between BYU and Utah. My dad made sure I knew my grandpa would be disappointed if I went with the U. I picked BYU, and that was that. My first game I watched was the 2006 Arizona game, since it happened to be on TBS. We didn't have the Mountain or Versus living in South Dakota, so the only other games I watched that year were the BC game and the Bowl. Listened to Rebel a lot, though. That is so cool. That is awesome. And hearing that, trying to tell like a Gen Alpha kid, hey, you're going to have to listen to just solely the radio for this game. It's not on TV. It's not on streaming. What? That was less than 20 years ago. And we were talking about how people couldn't get Versus or the Mountain. I remember paying a premium on DirecTV to get the Mountain and Versus and make sure I had it all. CSTV, all that stuff. Like that was terrible times. Terrible times. I was fortunate to be able to watch. But even that first year in 2006, I didn't have the Mountain. That was only Comcast. DirecTV didn't come around until 2007. But a cool story, BYU Statsman. Let's see. Dustin Ivers. Been going to games since birth, but I feel like every fan has that moment where they fall in love with the game. Mine during the 2006 season, I became obsessed with that team. I was 12 years old at the time. Beck, Brown, Harleen, Colley, Coates, Fui, Tonga, Jensen, Robinson, Kill, etc. The moment that sealed it for me was the Beck to Harleen play. I literally fell on my knees and broke down in tears. Since then, I've had many memorable moments. It's become such a fun way to bond with my extended family. We've traveled and attended many games together, and I look forward to many more. Go Cougs. The traveling piece is really cool. And thanks for the story, Dustin. That's awesome. The travel piece is so cool. My family, we used to just basically plan vacations in the fall. Summer vacations didn't exist for my family. We did some. Like I went to SeaWorld. I did the Disneyland thing. It wasn't like I was starved for summer vacations, but If it was up to me, I wanted to go to BYU versus USC in the Coliseum. I wanted to go see BYU Nevada in Reno. I wanted to always go to these games. My dad and my mom and my aunt and uncle, they went to BYU Arizona State in 1995. And I was just crushed that I could not go. That was just an adults only trip. I was just devastated. I stayed with my grandma. I remember staying up late on Fox Sports Net, watching that game. My grandma had that, and that determined who I stayed with. Was it my uncle? Was it my grandma? She had Fox Sports Net, so I was like, hey, I got to stay with grandma to watch this game. But the traveling is so cool. And BYU fans show up like no other. And that's been one of the fun parts of this job, is going to Big 12 venues and interacting with Big 12 media members. And they're just blown away by how BYU fans show up. I even point to the Stillwater game, Oklahoma State in 2023. Rainy, awful. BYU's 5-6. And still there was a nice contingent of fans. Like, it wasn't a huge showing. And it was hard to tell who's who with the ponchos, but you could see a strong presence of BYU fans still. It just floors you how BYU fans just show up. They always do. Grant Lundberg, he writes, my parents met and married at the Y. My fandom started when we lived in Walnut Creek, California. That seems like a very popular BYU hometown. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head of Walnut Creek, California hometown players. And my dad took me to the Ward Gymnasium to watch a game on the new satellite system with group of other fans from our stake. It was elite, baby. Then just a few years later, we moved to Utah, and I was in the stadium in his new season tickets, having Randall Cunningham break my heart. Oh, man, UNLV. Dang, that's cool. That's the old satellite system. I never had to deal with, I shouldn't say deal, but experience that, because I was fortunate growing up in Utah to have KSL5 TV. So I pretty much watched the games growing up. Like I didn't have to go ESPN game plan. I didn't have to go through many hurdles. The mountain was a challenge, yes, but there were times where there was a rare ESPN2 game, and I remember it was 1996 BYU Tulsa, and my dad and I, we didn't have ESPN2. It wasn't available in Salt Lake on the cable package. I think it was TLC cable. I can't remember what the name of the cable service was, but we kept calling them and saying, how can we watch BYU? How can we watch ESPN2 this week? And I think enough Cougar fans were doing that to where they added the channel for that 3.5-hour block on the Animal Planet. They funneled in the ESPN2 feed on Animal Planet, and we watched BYU Tulsa from Skelly Stadium on ESPN2. And it was that wacky lowercase ESPN2 font. You know what I'm talking about? The measures we will go. So that's probably the most extreme TV, trying to find a way. I'm sure the Stake Center probably would have had it too. I didn't think of that. I wasn't I was just pressing cable operators all the time. Royal Coug, first BYU game I ever saw on TV was the Miracle Bowl against SMU. What a way to start. Geez, are you telling me? On Mislu, no less? Getting that done? I mean, how could you not be hooked from there? True Blue, BYU, 1984. I was 10 in 1984. I watched the most amazing and magical season unfold before me. We had to go to a neighbor's house to watch this new ESPN channel to see some road games. First ever college football game was against number 3 Pitt on the road. I guess I thought winning a college football natty was just normal back then. Yeah. I talked to my dad sometimes about that. He romanticizes the 80s, man. He's one of those guys that just loves the 80s, wants to go back. Him, Jason Buck, send him back to the 80s. But it was a good time for Cougar football, that's for sure. Jared Allen, not the, I don't, and maybe it is. I don't think it's the Pro Football Hall of Famer, maybe Idaho State Bengal, but could be. Jared Allen writes, born into it, grew up in Edgemont in Provo. Dad went to BYU and his dad taught art there. My whole childhood revolved around the activities at BYU and athletics. Having season tickets to football games was huge. Did my 5th grade wax museum on Lavelle after I interviewed him. That's cool. That's awesome. That's a cool story. I'd like to see a picture of that. Michael Christensen, my dad left the Army and returned to school at BYU when I was 8. We lived in my grandparents' basement for a couple years, and Grandma was a big BYU fan. Grandpa wasn't into it. So grandma started taking me to football and basketball games with their season tickets, fell in love. That's pretty cool too. My grandma, it was interesting. And I loved my grandma Harper. She passed away a couple years ago. So my dad, BYU fan, my uncle, my dad's brother, Utah fan. And my grandma, if you remember this, there was a song that said BYU of you. I'm not a singer, so I'm not going to give you the song, but she had the sweatshirt in her car and it was split. And I said, Grandma, what are you doing? Like, why can't you just pick a side? I think secretly she picked the Utes. I don't know. I don't want to speak ill of grandma who passed away a few years, but I think she was leaning the Utes. I don't know. I never really figured that out, but grandma was always supportive of BYU stuff too. Chris Murphy, back in the day, a faithful home teacher would come and pick my brother and I up and take us to the Stake Center to watch BYU football. It was he that exposed us to football since my own father had passed away when I was a baby. I was hooked from that moment. That's awesome. That's a cool story. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Bert Barnard, my best friends were BYU fans, and I remember watching the 1982 Holiday Bowl with them. My first in-person game was the 1987 Air Force game. That's cool. But my love for BYU football bloomed after I watched the 1990 Miami game on my mission. That is awesome. I mean, gosh, that Miami game, just the aura. I still feel like that game has the most aura, the just magnitude, the stakes of that game. BYU, Miami, 1990. I just don't know if you can ever draw that up again. You just don't see programs that are dynasties like Miami was then. I know the athletes are better now. I know the talent's better now. And some younger people are probably saying a bunch of guys were plumbers back then. But the aura, just the magnitude and taking down a program that warranted multiple documentaries, and BYU took them down. That's just cool. That is one of that to me will be, unless BYU wins a natty in the playoff or wins a playoff game. Maybe a Big 12 championship could exceed it too, but taking down the Miami Hurricanes, that was still a really good Miami team who won the Cotton Bowl that year. Ralph Jenkins, my oldest brother, went to BYU in the mid-late 70s and knew I loved sports sections. He would mail me old copies of the Daily Universe to read, and I was able to follow along through those great teams of the 70s and early 80s. That's really cool. I would do the newspaper thing too to get other markets. I'd go to a library. So in a given week to prep for I know it's so weird as a kid, like to say these sort of things, but I'd walk to a library or I'd go with my dad. We'd read other markets. So if it's, UNLV week, I'm going to read the Las Vegas Sun because there'd be a bunch of papers from other markets at the library. It was a Hunter Library out in West Valley, Utah. And I would go and read the Las Vegas Sun and get the intel on the Rebs because there wasn't any much internet access back then. So I'd turn to papers, and the library had a bunch of different markets. I'd get the LA Times, get all these different markets. It was pretty cool. USA Today for signing day. I remember the day after signing day, you get every team's signing class in USA Today. I bought every one until it became really readily accessible on the internet. Rowdy in the Rock writes, Taysom Hill hurdling the Texas defender. My life has never been the same since. That was an incredible moment. I mean, that Taysom Hill superstar icon status in BYU lore right there. Spencer Bryan, can't remember that far back, but I have pics of myself as a newborn in April 1985 wearing a BYU national champions onesie. Wow. I was born in it, molded by it, in the Bane voice. Love that. Cosmos Burner. When I was around 5 or 6 until about 11 or 12, my mom would take me to one football game a year. Then we started getting season tickets. Then Jimmer Mania happened, and we were hooked on BYU basketball. We have had season tickets to both for the last 6 years. Cool. That's really cool. Paul Charrington, first game was BYU versus Oregon in 1989. I was in the south end zone when Ty Detmer hit Jeff Franson with the winning touchdown. Attending the game live was so different than watching on TV. I missed the actual catch because I didn't know that people stood for big plays. I was 9. That is cool. 1989 BYU Oregon. I mean, that was That was a Friday night Fandomonium special. KBYU, that was always on replay. BYU, Oregon, 1989. I think by the time I was 9, I probably watched that 20 times. And there was no YouTube back then to watch that. And I still probably watched that game 20 times. MTM. My dad took me to a game when I was 4. My brothers told me to cheer for the blue team. So I cheered for the team with lightning bolts on their helmets. I cheered and my brother snapped at me. That's the wrong team. Woo. Great correction. Okay. Oh, this is great stuff. I could go on and on, man. I love this. Dylan was born into a BYU family. First game I remember going to ever was a game versus Colorado State when I was in first grade. At first was just a love for going out and hanging out with my dad. Then I grew to love the sport and learn the sport when Jamal and Taysom started playing. And I think that's what's fun too, is, you know, it just evolves over time. And then you get your guys that you kind of attach to and get those nostalgic feelings as well. So that's so cool. Greg went to the 1974 Fiesta Bowl as a kid, have followed BYU ever since. Awesome. 50th anniversary last year. Congrats on your fandom, Greg. It's awesome. I love that. And I think that's cool too, because I think a lot of Cougar fandom probably was maybe formed in the 80s, but you were one of the OGs, one of the original fans of BYU football with Lavelle back in those days. Some other ones on Cougar board. I was just scanning through these. Let's see. Sneaking onto an old IBM computer as a kid, connecting to the internet via dial-up in the early days of the internet and reading the old insider subscriber newsletters that got emailed out. VA Coug MD. We were probably on the same newsletters, man. We were probably on those same newsletters. UNLV Cougar writes, by reading And They Came to Pass. I must have read that book a million times over. I came into my fandom right at the beginning of the Detmer era, but that book ingrained BYU football into me. Yeah, the books, the VHS tapes, greatest moments in BYU football history. It's just fun, man. Like, and I bring this up too, just kind of wrap up. I know we're up against it, but you know, college football has changed so much, really, in even the last 6 years since I've been at KSL. Think about this: 2019 to now, NIL, BYU's in the Big 12, conference realignment, just insane changes. The Pac-12's gone. So many changes in this sport, just insane. And for BYU in particular, they're at the center of it all. But I think as more money gets involved in college football, I think that maybe it's turning some away, but I do believe there's still those core pieces of the traditions, the pageantry, the connecting with your family, being with your loved ones, going to a road game, traveling to different parts of the country that you probably would never go to in your wildest dreams. Like, I'm never going probably to Oklahoma if it wasn't for BYU football. I went to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and it was awesome. Like, I loved it. Stillwater was sweet. Morgantown, West Virginia, very cool. I probably would have no reason to ever visit West Virginia in my life if it wasn't for BYU football and BYU sports. I just think that's so cool. And going to those road games and just being a part of it and living through the team, like, win or lose, your emotions are sometimes tied to the outcome of these games. It's fun. The journey is the best part, I think. I think the journey is the best. And seeing how it all comes together. Like, yes, the undefeated rides are awesome. 2001, last year, starting 9-0 for BYU. Those sort of things are great. But I just think the journey in it all, how it all comes together, building the team, bringing it all together, all the little subplots, the storylines, the big recruiting wins, just it's day in, day out. And I wanted to put this segment together because with Cougar Tracks, I want you guys to feel connected to this show, men and women, whatever your walk of life, economic, social backgrounds, I don't care. If you're a Cougar fan, I want you to listen to this show and feel connected to it, because it's not lost on me, my background. And I remember being a kid and listening to post games and going, why is this not getting asked? And so I have you in mind. So I just think of that, and I want this show to connect Cougar Nation at a deep level. And I appreciate all of you for sharing your stories. I wish I could get to all of them, but I got to get to the next segment here. But I appreciate all the reaction. We'll probably dive in a little bit more, maybe do a digital write-up as well. We've got to take a timeout. Our final timeout. On the other side, we'll get to the defensive depth chart here on Cougar Tracks, my post-fall camp depth chart projection coming up next here on Cougar Tracks. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube every single day. We're talking BYU sports here on Cougar Tracks, and we're 9 days away until kickoff. And Kalani Sitake said to close out camp that he's probably going to put out a depth chart. He still will continue to do that. We dove into the offensive depth chart. Now, I'll give you my defensive depth chart for what I think could be the week 1 depth chart when BYU reveals that heading into Portland State week coming up next week. So we'll start off with the defensive line, the bold defensive end spot. I'm going to go with Viliami Puha or Bodie Schoonover as maybe co-starters. I could see an or listed between them, with the backup being Hunter Clegg. I think those are some good options there. I think Viliami has really improved a lot, and he's only a sophomore. And I think Bodie is in a position to play the most reps and snaps he's played in his BYU career. I think just the question of all three of those guys is, what can you expect from all three of them? There just hasn't been much production yet. They haven't been given many opportunities yet. So I think they're going to take on a bigger role this season at that bold defensive end position. Nose tackle will go Keanu Tanavasa, and then behind him will go Anisi Purcell. Pretty, I think, self-explanatory there. Defensive tackle, I think there's nuance here. John Talmoipeu as the starter alongside Keanu. But keep in mind, if Justin Kirkland gets healthy, I would expect he's going to be in that first team unit. But again, JT is going to be really good. I'm telling you, he's going to be a good football player. I think Cougar fans are going to be really impressed with him. His name maybe doesn't register many thoughts right now, but he's a good pass rusher. When you're alongside Keanu and he's going to count for so much attention, JT is going to make plays this year. I really believe that. So very excited for the potential of JT, but BYU would be well served getting Justin Kirkland back sooner rather than later. Outside edge, that OE position, you got Logan Latui or Tausili Akana. Kind of different builds. And Latui could play that bold defensive end spot, but he's going to be more of an OE for BYU. And Tausili Akana, I think he's going to be special for the Cougars. But I think both of them are going to generate a lot more pressure. And I think they're going to get home and register some sack numbers this season for BYU. Will one of those guys be 10 sacks? I think Akana probably could be potentially that guy. I think Latui, though, will get some numbers as well. And then you got also Ephraim Asiata, who probably is that outside edge, but he can also play that Sam linebacker position. Very versatile player in Jay Hill's defense. We go to the linebacker position. Rover, you got Jack Kelly. I'm going to go with him as a starter. Obviously, he's a stud. Leader in sacks a season ago. He's going to probably wear the helmet communication once again. Jack Kelly, say less. Back up behind him, Max Alford, Utah State transfer. He has risen up the boards in the last couple of weeks of fall camp. Max Alford is a name to watch. Mac linebacker, Sialia Serra or Che Bryant Strother. I lean to Sialia Serra, but what I think will tell the story is who plays the most snaps in a given game. But I think Serra's great. I think Che Bryant Strother's great. BYU is in a good place in its linebacker position. Sam linebacker, you got Isaiah Glasser, and then behind him, I'm going to go with Ace Kafusi. Right cornerback position, I'm going to go Maury Bamba, and behind him, Jaden Dunlap. And then at left cornerback, let's go Evan Johnson or Trey Alexander. I think that's a little bit of a coin flip between those two. And then Marcus McKenzie as that fifth guy. The nickel position, Jonathan Cabella, Tavion Beasley as the backup. Strong safety where there's a dogfight, and the safety position at large, as Jay Hill discussed earlier in camp, dogfight at these spots. Let's go with Raider DeMooney and Tanner Wall as the starters. DeMooney at strong safety, Tanner Wall at free safety, And then behind DeMooney at strong will go Tommy Parasis and then free safety Falatau Satawala. That's your defense. Special teams kicker, I'm going to go with Will Farron, obviously. And then behind him, Matthias Dunn, who, according to Kalani, having a really good camp. Punter, Sam Vanderhaar, and Fuller Shirts as the backup. Long snapper, Garrison Grimes, and Ty Smith, a Boise State transfer. Some return men. Parker Kingston's going to be the punt return man, no question about that. But other options there, Jovesa DeMooney, Tiger Bachmeyer, maybe even Cannon DeVries. And Cannon DeVries, he's a name to watch at cornerback, at nickel as well. But I think in a perfect world, you redshirt him and maintain his eligibility because he's going to be a good one down the road. I think kick returner Parker Kingston, Bachmeyer, maybe Chase Roberts, potentially. You got some options there, but this is a good football team. BYU is gearing up for an exciting season. It's going to be a lot of fun this year, and we're going to be breaking it all down here on Cougar Tracks on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio.